Imagine this, a small, dimly lit diner tucked away on the corner of a sleepy town, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon fills the air. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, and the waitress behind the counter has a smile that could light up the darkest of nights. But what if I told you that this ordinary diner, this ordinary waitress, and one seemingly ordinary night would change everything? What if I told you that a single moment, a single kiss could unravel a story so extraordinary, so full of twists and turns, that it would leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, fate, and the power of a single decision? This is not just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. This is a story about secrets, about choices, and about how one life can change in the blink of an eye. And by the end of this video, you'll have the answers to the questions that brought you here. But be warned, once you start, you won't be able to look away. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like your life was stuck on repeat? Like no matter how hard you tried, you were always just waiting for something to happen? That's exactly how our waitress, Emily, felt. She was 26 years old, working double shifts at the diner just to make ends meet, and dreaming of a life that felt just out of reach. She wasn't asking for much, just a little bit of luck, a little bit of magic, something to break the monotony of her everyday routine. But what she didn't know was that her life was about to change in a way she could never have imagined. And it all started with one customer. One mysterious, impossibly handsome customer who walked into the diner that night and turned her world upside down. Now I know what you're thinking. Another rags to riches story? Really? But trust me, this isn't your typical fairy tale. This is a story about real people, real emotions, and real consequences. It's about the kind of love that doesn't just sweep you off your feet, it changes who you are. And it's about the kind of secrets that can either bring you closer together or tear you apart. So, if you're ready to dive into a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat, if you're ready to find out what really happened that night, then keep watching. Because I promise you, this is one story you won't want to miss. Let's talk about Emily for a moment. She's not your typical heroine. She's not a damsel in distress waiting for a prince to rescue her. She's strong, she's independent, and she's got a heart of gold. But she's also human. She's got dreams, she's got fears, and she's got a past that she's trying to outrun. And then there's him, the billionaire, the man who walked into the diner that night and changed everything. His name is Alexander Blackwood. And he's not just rich, he's powerful. He's enigmatic, and he's got a reputation that precedes him. But what was he doing in a small-town diner in the middle of nowhere? And why did he seem so drawn to Emily? I want you to picture this scene. It's late. The diner is almost empty, and Emily is wiping down the counter when the bell above the door jingles. In walks Alexander, dressed in a suit that probably costs more than Emily makes in a year. He sits down at the counter, orders a black coffee, and then he just watches her. Not in a creepy way, but in a way that makes her feel like he can see right through her. Like he knows something about her that even she doesn't know. And then, as she's handing him his coffee, their hands brush and something passes between them. Something electric. Something undeniable. And before either of them can think twice, he leans in and kisses her. Just like that, one kiss. One moment. And everything changes. But here's the thing. This isn't just a love story. It's a mystery. Because as much as Alexander seems to be drawn to Emily, there's something he's not telling her. Something big. Something that could change everything. And as the story unfolds, you're going to find yourself asking questions. Who is Alexander Blackwood, really? What does he want with Emily? And what's the secret that he's hiding? Because trust me, there's a secret. A big one. And it's going to blow your mind. Now, I know you're probably wondering how this all ends. Does Emily get her happily ever after? Does Alexander turn out to be the man she thinks he is? Or is there something darker lurking beneath the surface? Well, I'm not going to spoil it for you. But what I will say is this. By the time you reach the end of this video, you're going to have all the answers. You're going to know what really happened that night, and you're going to understand why this story has captivated so many people. But more than that, you're going to feel something. Whether it's joy, heartbreak, or just the satisfaction of a story well told, you're going to feel it. And that's what makes this story so special. So if you're ready to dive into a world of love, mystery, and intrigue, then keep watching. Because this is just the beginning. And trust me, you're not going to want to miss what happens next. But before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a moment that changed everything? A moment that made you question who you are and what you want out of life? Because that's exactly what's about to happen to Emily. And who knows? Maybe by the end of this video, you'll be asking yourself the same questions. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive into the story of Emily and Alexander. But be warned, once you start, you won't be able to stop. And when you reach the end, you'll be left with one burning question. What would you do if you were in Emily's shoes? Stay tuned because the answers are coming. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Back to the diner. Back to the night that changed everything. The diner was a relic of a bygone era, its neon sign flickering faintly against the backdrop of a starless sky. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, where the regulars came not just for the food, but for the sense of belonging it offered. Emily had been working there for 3 years, ever since she moved to the small town of Willow Creek to escape the chaos of her old life. She didn't talk much about her past, but the shadows in her eyes hinted at a story she wasn't ready to tell. To the locals, she was just the sweet, hardworking waitress who always had a kind word and a warm smile. But to Emily, the diner was more than just a job. It was her sanctuary, the one place where she felt in control. That is, until Alexander Blackwood walked in and shattered the fragile peace she had built. Alexander wasn't just any customer. He was a man who carried an air of mystery wherever he went, his presence commanding attention without him ever having to say a word. His reputation preceded him: billionaire, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and, according to the tabloids, one of the most eligible bachelors in the country. But what was a man like him doing in a sleepy town like Willow Creek? And why did he seem so interested in Emily? It wasn't just the kiss, though. That alone was enough to send her mind spinning. It was the way he looked at her, as if he could see past the walls she had built around herself, as if he knew something about her that even she didn't. And then there were the questions. Questions about her life, her dreams, her fears. Questions that no one had ever bothered to ask before. Questions that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. But as much as Emily wanted to believe that Alexander was just a man who had stumbled into her life by chance, something about him didn't add up. For one, he seemed to know things about her that he shouldn't. Little details like the fact that she loved jazz music or that she had a scar on her left wrist from a childhood accident. And then there was the way he always seemed to show up at the diner at the strangest times, as if he were watching her. At first, Emily tried to brush it off as coincidence, but the more she thought about it, the more she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling her. Something big. Something that could change everything. Meanwhile, Alexander had his own secrets to keep. To the outside world, he was the picture of success, a self-made billionaire who had everything he could ever want. But behind the polished facade was a man haunted by his past. A past that involved betrayal, loss, and a promise he had made to someone he loved. A promise that had brought him to Willow Creek in the first place. Because Alexander wasn't just there by chance. He was there for a reason that had everything to do with Emily. But as much as he wanted to tell her the truth, he knew he couldn't. Not yet. Not until he was sure she could handle it. And so, he played the part of the charming stranger, biding his time, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. But the longer he waited, the harder it became to keep his secrets hidden as the days turned into weeks. Emily found herself drawn deeper into Alexander's world. He took her to places she had only ever dreamed of: fancy restaurants, art galleries, even a private concert by her favorite jazz musician. And with each passing day, she felt herself falling for him a little more. But there was always that nagging feeling in the back of her mind, that voice telling her to be careful, that things weren't as they seemed. And then there were the strange occurrences. The anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. The feeling of being watched when she was alone. The cryptic notes left on her doorstep. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was all in her head. But deep down, she knew better. Someone was watching her. And she had a feeling it had something to do with Alexander. But Emily wasn't the only one with secrets. There was also Sarah, her best friend, and co-worker at the diner, who had her own reasons for being wary of Alexander. Sarah had always been protective of Emily, and she didn't trust the billionaire one bit. She had seen the way he looked at Emily, the way he seemed to know things about her that he shouldn't, and she was determined to find out what he was hiding. But the more she dug, the more she realized that Alexander wasn't the only one with something to hide. There were others, people who didn't want Emily to know the truth. People who would do whatever it took to keep their secrets buried. And then there was the diner itself, which seemed to hold secrets of its own. Emily had always felt a strange connection to the place, as if it were somehow tied to her past. But every time she tried to dig deeper, she hit a wall. The owner, an elderly man named Joe, was tight-lipped about the diner's history, and the townspeople seemed to know even less. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important about the diner, something that held the key to the mystery surrounding Alexander and the strange events that had been happening since he came into her life. As the tension between Emily and Alexander grew, so did the stakes. The more she learned about him, the more she realized that he wasn't just a man with secrets, he was a man with a mission. A mission that involved her in ways she couldn't yet understand. And as much as she wanted to trust him, she couldn't ignore the feeling that she was being pulled into a web of lies and deception. But the question was, who was lying? And what were they trying to hide? The story was far from over, and the answers were still out of reach. But one thing was certain, Emily's life would never be the same. The question was, would she be able to handle the truth when it finally came out? Or would it destroy everything she had worked so hard to build? The answers were coming, but not yet. Not until the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. And when it did, it would change everything. But until then, the mystery remained, and the tension continued to build. Because in a story like this, nothing is ever as it seems. And the truth? The truth is always more complicated than it appears. The tension between Emily and Alexander reached a boiling point one stormy night, the kind of night where the rain lashed against the windows and the wind howled like a warning. They were sitting in his penthouse suite, the city lights flickering below like distant stars, when Emily finally confronted him. She had been piecing together the fragments of his story, the inconsistencies in his words, the way he always seemed to evade her questions. And then there were the things she had discovered on her own, the old newspaper clippings she found hidden in his study, the faded photograph of a woman who looked eerily like her, the cryptic notes that seemed to hint at a past he was desperate to keep buried. She demanded answers, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. But instead of giving her the truth, Alexander did something she never expected. He walked away. Just like that. No explanation, no apology. Just silence. Emily was left reeling, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Who was the woman in the photograph? What was Alexander hiding? And why did she feel like she was at the center of a game she didn't understand? But before she could process what had happened, something even more unexpected occurred. The next morning, as she was opening the diner, she found a letter slipped under the door. It was addressed to her, written in a handwriting she didn't recognize. The message was short but chilling. You're closer to the truth than you think. But be careful. Not everyone wants you to find it. Emily's hands shook as she read the words, her heart pounding in her chest. Someone was watching her. Someone who knew more about her than they should. And they were warning her to stop digging. But why? What were they afraid she would find? Meanwhile, Sarah's investigation into Alexander was taking a dangerous turn. She had been following leads, talking to people who knew him, and piecing together a picture of a man who was far more complicated than he appeared. She discovered that Alexander's rise to wealth and power hadn't been as straightforward as the media made it seem. There were rumors of shady business deals, of people who had crossed him and disappeared without a trace. And then there was the woman in the photograph, a woman named Clara, who had been Alexander's fiancée 8 years ago. Clara had vanished under mysterious circumstances, and no one had seen or heard from her since. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Clara's disappearance was connected to Emily, but she didn't know how. And the more she dug, the more she realized that she was in over her head. Because someone didn't want her to find the truth. Someone who was willing to do whatever it took to keep it buried. As Emily tried to make sense of the letter and the growing sense of unease that surrounded her, she found herself drawn back to the diner. There was something about the place, something that felt like a piece of the puzzle she was trying to solve. She spent hours going through old records, talking to Joe, the owner, and even questioning some of the regulars. But no one seemed to know anything, or if they did, they weren't talking. That is, until one night, when an elderly woman named Margaret, who had been coming to the diner for as long as Emily could remember, pulled her aside. Margaret's voice was low and urgent as she spoke. "You need to be careful, dear. There are things about this place, about your past, that you don't understand. And there are people who will do anything to keep it that way." Before Emily could ask her what she meant, Margaret hurried out of the diner, leaving her with more questions than answers. The stakes were higher than ever, and the sense of danger was palpable. Emily knew she was getting closer to the truth, but she also knew that the closer she got, the more at risk she was. And then, just when she thought things couldn't get any more complicated, Alexander reappeared. He showed up at the diner one evening, his expression unreadable, and asked to speak with her. Emily was torn between her desire for answers and her fear of what she might learn. But in the end, curiosity won out. They sat in a corner booth, the diner empty except for the faint hum of the jukebox in the background. Alexander's voice was quiet but intense as he spoke. "I know you have questions, Emily, and I want to answer them. But you need to understand that the truth isn't going to be easy to hear, and once you know it, there's no going back." Emily's heart raced as she listened, her mind spinning with possibilities. What was he about to tell her? And why did it feel like her entire world was about to shift on its axis? But before Alexander could say more, the sound of shattering glass broke the silence. They both turned to see a brick thrown through the diner window, a note tied to it with a red ribbon. Emily's hands trembled as she untied the note and read the words scrawled across it. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." The message was clear, but the threat was even clearer. Someone didn't want her to find the truth, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to stop her. The tension was unbearable, the sense of danger closing in from all sides. Emily knew she was at a crossroads, that the choices she made next would determine not just her future, but the future of everyone involved. But the question was, could she handle the truth when it finally came out? And more importantly, could she trust Alexander to tell her the whole story? Because one thing was certain, nothing was as it seemed. And the closer she got to the truth, the more she realized that the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. But the answers were coming. And when they did, they would change everything. Until then, the mystery remained, the tension building with every passing moment. Because in a story like this, the truth is never simple. And the cost of uncovering it? That's the real mystery. The night of the storm felt like a turning point, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for the truth to finally come to light. Emily sat across from Alexander in the dimly lit diner, the shattered window boarded up and the air thick with tension. The brick with its ominous note lay on the counter, a stark reminder of the danger that seemed to be closing in from all sides. Alexander's face was grave, his usual confidence replaced by something darker, something haunted. He took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto hers, and began to speak. "Emily, there's something you need to know. Something about me, about you, about why I came here. But before I tell you, you need to understand that this isn't just about us. It's about a promise I made a long time ago. A promise to someone I loved." Emily's heart pounded as she listened, her mind racing to piece together the fragments of his story. Alexander explained that Clara, the woman in the photograph, had been more than just his fiancée. She had been his childhood friend, his confidant, and the one person who had believed in him when no one else did. But Claire had also been hiding a secret that had ultimately led to her disappearance. She had been investigating a powerful group of individuals involved in illegal activities, people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. When Clara got too close to the truth, she vanished, leaving behind only a trail of unanswered questions and a heartbroken Alexander. He had spent years searching for her, following every lead, but the trail had gone cold until he met Emily. Emily's breath caught in her throat as Alexander revealed the truth. Clara had been her older sister, a fact that had been hidden from her since childhood. Their parents, fearing for their safety, had separated the two sisters after Claire's disappearance, erasing all traces of her from their lives. Emily had been too young to remember, but the resemblance between them was undeniable. Alexander had recognized it the moment he saw her, and that was why he had come to Willow Creek. He had been searching for Clara, but instead he had found Emily. And in her, he had found a chance to uncover the truth about what had happened to the woman he loved. The revelation hit Emily like a tidal wave, her mind struggling to process the enormity of what she had just learned. She had a sister who had been taken from her, a sister who might still be out there waiting to be found. But before she could fully absorb the information, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. The door to the diner burst open and a group of men in dark suits entered, their faces grim and their intentions clear. They were the ones who had been watching her, the ones who had sent the threatening notes. And they were here to make sure the truth never came out. Alexander stood, his body tense and ready for a fight. He grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her behind him as the men advanced. "We need to go. Now," he said, his voice low and urgent. But before they could make a move, one of the men stepped forward, a cold smile on his face. "You really think you can outrun us, Blackwood? You should have stayed out of this. Now you've dragged her into it too." Emily's heart raced as she realized the danger they were in, but she also felt a surge of determination. She wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not when she was so close to the truth. In a moment of desperation, Alexander made a split-second decision. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, pressing a button that triggered a series of loud explosions outside. The distraction gave them just enough time to escape through the back door, the sound of shouting and chaos fading behind them as they ran into the stormy night. They didn't stop until they reached a safe house on the outskirts of town, a place Alexander had prepared for emergencies. As they caught their breath, Emily turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We're not running anymore," she said. "We're going to find out what happened to Clara. And we're going to make them pay." The final act of their journey was a whirlwind of action, emotion, and revelation. Together, Emily and Alexander uncovered the truth about the powerful group that had taken Clara, exposing their crimes and bringing them to justice. Along the way, they discovered that Claire had left behind a trail of clues, hidden in places only Emily would think to look. It was as if she had known, somehow, that her sister would one day come looking for her. And in the end, they found her alive, but forever changed by the years she had spent in hiding. The reunion was bittersweet, a moment of joy overshadowed by the scars of the past. But it was also a moment of closure, a chance for Emily to finally understand who she was and where she came from. The story ended with a twist that no one saw coming. As Emily and Alexander stood together, watching the sunrise over the horizon, Clara handed Emily a small, worn journal. "This is for you," she said. "It's everything I couldn't say. Everything I wanted you to know." Inside the journal were pages filled with Clara's thoughts, her dreams, and her hopes for the future. But the final entry was the most surprising of all. It revealed that Clara had known about Alexander long before he met Emily. She had been the one to send him to Willow Creek, hoping that he would find her sister and keep her safe. "You were always the strong one, Emily," Clara had written. "And I knew you'd be the one to finish what I started." The ending was both satisfying and poignant, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Emily had found her sister, uncovered the truth, and discovered a love she never expected. But more than that, she had found herself. And as the screen faded to black, the audience was left with a sense of awe, a feeling that they had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. Because this wasn't just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It was a story about family, about love, and about the power of the truth to change everything. And it was a story they would never forget.